Hello, my name is Barbara Rafool Patterson. I'm Joe Rafool's daughter. I was asked by the East Peoria Historical Society to make this tape. I want to start by thanking Randy Corey and Frank Bohr for helping me put this together. I could not have put it together without you guys. I worship the ground my father walked on, so this is going to be a little bit difficult for me. First of all, I want to start out by saying that my grandfather, Tom Rafool, and Mike Corey came over from My-2 Lebanon on the La Lorraine boat in 1907. My grandmother and my father, Joe Rafool, came on the Rockham Bow on September 17, 1920. My grandmother was 30 years old and my father was 8. My grandfather, Tom Rafool, worked on the Rock Island Railroad for years. Then he opened a grocery store. He called it the Rafool Grocery Store. After a while, Mike Corey and my grandfather went into partnership, and it was called the Rafool Corey Grocery Store, and that was in East Peoria on Washington Street. Mike Corey finally branched out on his own and opened his own grocery store up the street from where he and my grandfather were, and that was in 1930, and he called it Corey and Son. My grandfather kept his grocery store and called it the Rafool Grocery Store. My father was too young to go into business at that time, so he went to Brown's Business School, and after he got out of Brown's Business School, then he went to work for my grandfather in a grocery store business. The grocery store was in the front, and the Glee Club was in the back. After a while, my dad and Joe Corey opened up the Glee Club as partners. They stayed together for quite some time. After that, Dad bought the ground for the Paradise, and this is really cute. He built part of it in the city and the other half in the county. This way, when he would get a tip they were going to get raided, he sent the people that were on the city side over to the county side. Then when he would get a tip the county was going to get raided, he sent them over to the city side. This way they couldn't touch him. He was very clever. Dad had the whole gamut of gambling. He had slots, craps, horse racing out of New York, blackjack, and roulette. Dad at that time had High Time Entertainment. He had Pearl Bailey, Mildred Bailey, Jimmy Nelson, and Danny O'Day, the dummy, Red Buttons, and Harry Cool. Harry Cool stayed with Dad for several years. When Mildred Bailey came to perform, she asked Dad where the dressing room was. He pointed to a door. She came out laughing hysterically as she said she had never changed clothes in a shithouse before. Dad had no dressing room, just the bathroom. When the Sheltons came into the Paradise and demanded him to be partners, he gave them the key and said, "It's yours." Dad didn't want to be any part of it. They didn't want it that way. They wanted him to run it, and they wanted to be part of the take. My sister and I had to go to boarding school in Momence, Illinois, as we were going to be kidnapped and held for ransom. The key to us coming back home was they wanted Dad to run the Paradise, and then after that was settled, we were able to come back. Dad and Mom used to go to St. Louis or to Chicago for dinner quite often. They were getting ready to go on the road, and Dad stopped at the Paradise to make sure all was well before they left. Mom went in with him and waited for him. There was a man standing there, and Mom said, "Barbara, he was so handsome, you couldn't take your eyes off of him. His eyes were ice blue, and they were cold as ice." She told Dad on the way to St. Louis about the guy she saw inside. She said, "Joe, he was so handsome, but his eyes were like ice." Dad said, "He's my hitman and bodyguard." Mom yelled at him and said, "What do you need a hitman for?" That man was Ray Walker. I tried so hard to get a hold of him when the boat took over the Paradise. I spoke with his sister, and she said he was living in Minnesota. He was old and very sick. There was a gentleman that was a farmer that lost big at the Paradise. He didn't have the money to pay his debt, so he brought 40 pigs to the Paradise and dropped them in the parking lot for his payment. Dad took the pigs to Shaheen Meatpacking House and told him to cut them up and give it to the needy. Dad was a very charitable man. He paid people's rent, bought groceries, paid medicine, medical care for their children, and also their education. And Dad did this constantly. It wasn't just once a year. It was whoever needed it, he was there for them. Dad developed Fond du Lac Heights. He donated the ground for St. Monica's Church to be built on. He said, if the church goes up, the houses will go up. Dad also owned the property around St. Philomena's. He donated the church there. the ground for the church. He said when the church goes up, the homes will go up, and sure enough, they did. The Rotary Club wanted to start a charter, and they needed one more man to start the charter. They asked Dad to join. Dad put his application in, and of course they denied him because he was involved with the Shelton Gang, the St. Louis mob, Chicago mob, and New York mob. He was very close to Tony Bananas out of New York, and I have the watch that Tony gave to my father. Dad wanted Tony to be a partner in the Paradise, but Snooks Gordon and the Shelton Gang would not allow him to come. They said they would control this area. There was a gentleman by the name of Buster Wortman, who was the head honcho and mobster in St. Louis. He called Dad and wanted to meet with him with Sam Giancana. They wanted him to run a casino in Vegas, and Dad said no. On the way up to St. Louis, Dad spotted a car following him. He was a little bit leery, but didn't stop. The man, after he reached Buster Wortman's place, Buster Wortman had sent a gentleman from Peoria to St. Louis to make sure that Dad got there safe. Getting back to the Rotary Club, they still wanted Dad to be a chartered member there. Dad had the money back then and the name. Since they didn't allow him to come in on his own merits, he went down to the Paradise with another gentleman from the Rotary Club. He turned all the liquor bottles around and turned your parfaits facing forward with the label showing. He put down on his application he was a fruit peddler, and that's how he became a chartered member. Dad gave the first iron lung to East Peoria and Peoria County. He donated the first $10,000 to the Children's Hospital in Peoria. They took the $10,000 but wouldn't acknowledge it came from Dad, as they said it was dirty money because it came from the Paradise, but they still took it. We used to take the cab every morning to school as we lived on Fond du Lac Drive, and there was no Catholic schools in East Peoria, and Dad was adamant about us getting a Catholic education. At that time, Dad was making around $70,000 a week. They stashed the money underneath their mattress. There were times Mom said they were sleeping on $200,000 to $300,000. We would go into the mattress and take the money to pay for the cab. We had the same cab driver every day. His name was Clyde Walker, no relation to Ray. He would call Dad and say, "Joe, the kids paid me with a $100 bill again." Dad would say, "Keep it." We didn't know the difference between a $1 bill, a $10 bill, and a $100 bill. Dad had apartments he would rent out. He would go to collect the rent, and they didn't have their rent money. Dad felt sorry for them, so he never got his rent money ever, and just kept buying them groceries weekly as they had families. Dad was not going to allow a family not to have food to eat. He used to say, unless you help people that are less fortunate than you are a very hollow person. We had so much in those days. People were in bread lines, and we were eating lobster, going to the Shapery in Chicago, having lavish vacations. Our big treat for the week was Dad and Mom taking us to the Hotel Pierre Marquette for lobster dinners on Friday night. Dad had lobster flown in monthly from New York and big pheasant dinners, shrimp cocktail, and steak dinners at the Paradise, along with his entertainment. This was weekly. We knew nothing but the best of best. We had people that lived with us: Edith, Kotler, Gladys Rhodes, Willie, Madeline, Linda Corey. I can go on and on. They all had their chores. We had constant help. People today call them nannies or maids. We just call them by name. Dad used to say they are not beneath you, so you never refer to them as a maid to make them feel inferior and to make yourself look big, because you make yourself look small. We had police protection 24 hours a day. Dad knew where we were at all times. There were 2 vacant lots on each side of the house on Fond du Lac Drive. There was a squad car on each side of the house in case someone lost big and wanted to kidnap us.